6 years into my marriage with Faith, and while I always knew relationships come with their ups and downs, I never anticipated things falling apart so completely. Honestly, the last couple of years have been an absolute train wreck. And let me tell you, the first thing to crumble was trust. It's ironic because, at first, everything seemed like it was going so well. Sure, we had the occasional disagreement, what couple doesn't? But overall, we felt solid. We talked about big plans, starting a family, buying a house, and building the kind of life you imagine when you're in love. You know, the whole dream scenario. But then Faith's mom got remarried, and that's when Saren entered the picture. Here's the backstory. When Faith's mom remarried, she gained a new stepdaughter, Saren. But Saren wasn't just some stranger blending into the family dynamic. She and Faith had history, and not the good kind. They went to high school together, and Faith had always described her as manipulative and sneaky. According to Faith, Saren was the type to pretend to be sweet while secretly plotting to undermine you. And everything was a competition between them, grades, guys, friends, anything that could be measured. Back then, I thought Faith's stories were just remnants of teenage drama. I mean, high school girls can be vicious, but I figured it was all in the past. When Saren started popping up after the wedding, I didn't think much of it. She visited often to spend time with her mom, which seemed pretty normal to me. But Faith? She couldn't stand it. Every visit from Saren put Faith on edge, and I couldn't understand why. To me, Saren came across as friendly, maybe a little too forward at times, but nothing alarming. We even got along. Looking back now, I realized that was the beginning of the end. Saren had this habit of throwing out flirty comments every so often. They weren't overt, just playful quips or smiles that lingered a little too long. I'll admit she was attractive, but I never thought of her that way. To me, it was harmless banter. But Faith saw it differently. To her, every move Saren made was a deliberate attempt to humiliate or challenge her. Over time, Faith's irritation toward Saren escalated into full-blown hostility. She'd glare at me if I so much as acknowledged Saren's presence. The tension between us was suffocating. And then there were the arguments, endless, exhausting fights. Faith accused me of paying too much attention to Saren, of being overly friendly. It felt like every time Saren visited, Faith and I were destined to have a blowout as soon as she left. Saren, of course, didn't help. She seemed to enjoy provoking Faith, as if it was all a game to her. I'll never forget one particular night when everything exploded. Saren had joined us for dinner, and afterward, Faith was so furious that she smashed a glass on the floor. She screamed at me, accusing me of ogling Saren and saying I clearly found her more attractive. I tried to de-escalate the situation, but nothing I said seemed to matter. Every fight circled back to Saren, no matter how much I tried to reassure Faith. Now, looking back, I can't believe I didn't see the cracks forming earlier. It feels like everything was falling apart right in front of me, and I was completely oblivious. Faith's competitive streak with Saren had always been there, long before things spiraled out of control. She used to tell me stories about how she'd humiliate Saren in front of their school friends, making her look foolish. That rivalry never really died, it just mutated into something uglier. Over time, Saren's visits became something I dreaded, not because of Saren herself, but because I knew what they'd trigger. Every visit brought more accusations, more fights. Faith simply couldn't let it go, and I was getting tired of the constant drama. I tried to play it safe. When Saren was around, I avoided talking to her as much as possible, hoping it would keep Faith calm. But, of course, that only backfired. Faith started accusing me of acting weird or distant, as if I was hiding something. It felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't win. Looking back now, it's clear how warped the situation had become. Faith's jealousy wasn't just about Saren, it was about control. She wanted to dominate every aspect of our relationship, demanding my undivided attention at all times. Saren's presence disrupted that illusion, and it drove Faith to the edge. To Faith, Saren wasn't just a nuisance. She was a threat, and I was stuck in the middle of their toxic rivalry. The worst part was that Faith wasn't only jealous. She was obsessed with proving she was better than Saren. It felt like her entire identity hinged on reminding me, or maybe herself, that she was the one who won me. Instead of focusing on our marriage, She put all her energy into trying to tear Saren down. Things really escalated when Saren started coming around more often. Faith became convinced I was flirting with her, even though I was doing everything in my power to avoid her altogether. But the more Faith pushed her insecurities onto me, the more distant I became. That's when it hit me. Our marriage wasn't about love or trust anymore. It had turned into some twisted game where every interaction with Saren was a battle Faith had to win. The cracks in our relationship were widening with each fight. Faith would blow up over the smallest things. If I smiled at Saren, spoke to her for a bit too long, or even glanced in her direction, it was like living in a minefield where every move I made set off another explosion. I eventually gave up trying to explain myself. What was the point? Faith had already decided I was guilty, and no amount of reasoning would change her mind. The saddest part of all of this? I hadn't even done anything wrong. Sure, I got along with Saren, but I never saw her as more than Faith's stepsister. Yet in Faith's mind I was the bad guy right from the start. That was the moment I realized the truth. Our marriage was falling apart. Those endless fights about Saren, the constant accusations, and the jealousy chipped away at us bit by bit. Deep down, I think Faith didn't even want to fix things. She just wanted to prove she was right. And no, things didn't magically improve after all those arguments. In fact, they only got worse. Faith's fixation on winning this imaginary competition with Saren led to even more ridiculous, petty games. At that point, I didn't even know what she was trying to achieve. I just felt like a bystander, dragged along on this destructive ride. Started subtly, so subtle I almost didn't recognize it for what it was. One evening, I walked into the kitchen after work, and there they were, roses. They were sitting on the counter like a centerpiece demanding attention. Confused, I called out to Faith, who was in another room. "What's with the flowers?" I asked. She sauntered into the kitchen with a smug grin plastered across her face, the kind that screamed she was up to something. "Oh, just something from someone who appreciates me," she said, her voice laced with that infuriatingly passive-aggressive tone she had perfected over the years. I didn't react. I knew exactly what she was doing. I'd been through this kind of manipulation before, and I wasn't about to take the bait. But that grin of hers told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't interested in resolving our issues. She was determined to stir the pot even more. She wanted me to feel jealous, to think some guy out there was chasing after her, vying for her attention. She wanted me to feel threatened, but the only thing I felt was exhausted. Exhausted from the endless games, the manipulation, and the ridiculous competitions she seemed to invent out of thin air. Whether it was with Saren, me, or some imaginary rival she'd conjured up, Faith was always locked in a battle. But I wasn't interested in playing along anymore. So, when she pulled her little stunt with the flowers, I didn't react. I just shrugged and said, "That's nice. Anyway, how about my day?" And honestly, I wasn't lying. It really didn't matter to me. In the grand scheme of things, it was just one more petty attempt to provoke me. But Faith wasn't the type to let a failed scheme go. No, if one tactic didn't work, she'd escalate. When she saw I wasn't taking the bait, she upped the ante. Suddenly, there were sly mentions of a new man in her life. She'd leave random notes around the house, supposedly written by this mystery guy, or drop hints about how a coworker was giving her extra attention. It was so painfully transparent. I almost felt embarrassed for her. I mean, seriously, who leaves fake love notes for their own husband to find? It was like she'd been transported back to high school, and I was supposed to be an unwitting character in her drama. Each time she made one of these ridiculous comments, I just smile, nod, and act indifferent. And the truth is, I really didn't care. I knew she wasn't seeing anyone. This wasn't about her having an affair. It was just another one of her mind games. She wasn't trying to hurt me by cheating. She was trying to control me, to make me jealous enough to beg for her attention. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. When the notes and offhand remarks didn't have the desired effect, Faith played what she must have thought was her trump card. One day, out of the blue, I got a text from her. It was a picture of her kissing some guy, Kyle, one of her coworkers. The message simply read, "Thought you should know." Now, any other husband in this situation might have lost it. If your wife sends you a photo of herself kissing someone else, the expected reaction is to explode, to demand answers. But when I saw that picture, I didn't feel anger or betrayal. I didn't feel anything. The kiss looked staged, stiff, like something out of a bad high school play. It wasn't real, it was a performance meant for one audience. Me. I stared at my phone, and the only thought running through my mind was, how the hell did we end up like this? This was my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, and here she was, stooping to this level, sending fake photos of herself kissing another man just to provoke a reaction. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about power, control, her desperate need to feel like she was in charge. But I wasn't going to give her the reaction she wanted. I didn't respond to the text. I didn't call her. I didn't even bother asking about Kyle because, in reality, Kyle wasn't the issue. He was just another pawn in Faith's manipulative game. I put the phone down, grabbed my keys, and went for a walk to clear my head. Confronting Kyle would have been pointless. I could already see how that would play out. I'd look like the jealous, irrational husband while Faith played the victim. No, Kyle wasn't the root of the problem. The real issue was Faith, and the toxic, controlling mess our marriage had become. It was Faith. She was the one orchestrating everything, pulling all the strings, and I knew I had to decide what I was going to do about it. As I walked, memories of all the times I tried to salvage our marriage came flooding back. We'd been to counseling, we'd had countless exhausting conversations about fixing things, but it always led nowhere. Faith didn't care about finding solutions or making things better. She thrived on the chaos. The cycle was her comfort zone. Fight, make up, fight again. She always kept me off balance, always made me feel like I was the one in the wrong. For the longest time, I believed her. I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe if I worked harder, paid more attention, or bent over backward to give her whatever she needed, things would change. But they didn't. Because it was never about me, it was always about her. Looking back, I could see the pattern so clearly. Faith had a playbook she used time and again. She'd weaponize jealousy, accuse me of not caring enough, and twist every situation to make me feel guilty for things I hadn't done. I'll never forget one particular incident. It was probably over something trivial, like sarin. Faith broke down in tears, sobbing about how I didn't love her anymore, how I wasn't the man she married, and how everything was my fault. And like an idiot, I believed her. I spent the entire night apologizing, trying to make things right, while all she did was manipulate me. Now, though, I see it for what it was, emotional blackmail. She played on my feelings, turning my guilt into her weapon. This whole secret admirer charade and the kiss with Kyle? It was just another ploy to make me feel like I was the one to blame. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to fall for her games again. When I got home that evening, I didn't mention the picture. I didn't ask about Kyle. I acted as though nothing had happened. I could tell it was driving her insane, waiting for me to snap, to confront her, to start yelling. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I had decided I wasn't playing her game anymore. She tried a few more times to provoke me. She'd casually bring up Kyle in conversation, drop hints about their supposed dates. But I just let it slide. I knew the truth. Whatever was happening between her and Kyle wasn't real. It was just her desperate, last-ditch effort to mess with my head, to make me feel like I was losing her. But the truth was I'd already lost her, or maybe I never really had her to begin with. After the photo of her kissing Kyle, I hit my breaking point. The anger boiled inside me, but it wasn't just rage. It was a deeper frustration, fueled by the betrayal, the manipulation, and the audacity of Faith to pull such a childish, cruel stunt. She had taken what was already a failing marriage and turned it into a toxic circus. This wasn't just another fight. It was a twisted power play she was orchestrating. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, and ask how she could think any of this was okay. But as I mulled it over, I realized confronting her wouldn't accomplish anything. And Kyle? Confronting him would have been even more pointless. It was obvious he had no idea what he'd stumbled into. He was just another pawn in Faith's endless game. I didn't know much about Kyle, but from what little I'd gathered, he seemed like an ordinary guy. Harmless, just trying to go about his life. If anything, he was another piece on Faith's chessboard, a pawn in her game. The real issue wasn't Kyle. It was Faith. And by this point, I'd learned that reacting the way she wanted would only play right into her hands. So instead of giving in to my anger and confronting her, or Kyle, I did something completely unexpected. I called Saren. Yeah, Saren. The same Saren who'd been at the center of so much drama in my marriage. At that point, I was desperate for someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't just throw generic marriage advice at me. Saren was the only person who truly understood Faith for who she was. Manipulative, controlling, and cruel when it suited her. If anyone could make sense of what I was going through, it was her. I didn't bother with small talk when she picked up. Saren, I need to talk. Faith pulled something serious this time. Her response was immediate and to the point. Come over. I'm free. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on her couch, my hands trembling with frustration as I poured everything out. I didn't hold back. I told her about the flowers, the fake notes, and the staged photo of Faith kissing Kyle. Saren listened quietly, her expression unreadable. When I finally finished, I expected shock or maybe sympathy. Instead, she leaned back in her chair with a faint smirk, like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. I'm not surprised, she said, her tone almost amused. Faith's always been like this. She's just better at hiding it from most people. Her words sent a chill down my spine. The way she spoke, so calm and certain, made it clear she'd been expecting this to happen eventually. I stared at her, hoping for some words of comfort, something to ease the weight on my chest. But instead, she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. You have to stay with me, she said casually, like she'd just suggested grabbing a cup of coffee. At first, I laughed, assuming it was some kind of twisted joke to lighten the mood. But then I saw her expression. Steady, serious, and completely devoid of humor. That's when it hit me. She wasn't joking. Wait, what? I stammered, half convinced I'd misheard. You heard me, she said, flashing a sly smile as if her suggestion was the most logical thing in the world. If Faith wants to play these games, why not give her a taste of her own medicine? She cheats on you with Kyle. You sleep with me. Fair's fair, right? I sat there, stunned, trying to process what she just said. Saren had always been a little flirtatious. Sure. But this was something else entirely. My mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions and conflicting thoughts. A small, dark part of me, one I wasn't proud of, wanted to say yes, to take her up on the offer. It would have been so easy. Too easy. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go through with it. No, I said firmly, shaking my head. I can't. That's not who I am. Saren didn't seem surprised by my answer. She just shrugged, as if my refusal didn't matter either way. But her eyes told a different story. They weren't indifferent. They were calculating, watching me closely, almost like she'd been testing me. Maybe she'd expected me to say no. Maybe the offer was more about seeing how far I'd go than anything else. As we kept talking, it became clear that Saren wasn't just an innocent bystander in all of this. She had her own agenda, her own deeply rooted grudge against Faith. It dated back to their high school days, when Faith's manipulative ways had left their mark. Now, years later, Saren seemed almost gleeful at the prospect of Faith's life falling apart. You know, Saren said with a playful edge in her voice, Faith has always been like this. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This wasn't just about my failing marriage. It was about decades of resentment and a rivalry that had never truly ended. And now it felt like Saren was ready to watch it all burn. Even back in school, Saren began, her tone sharp with bitterness. She'd go out of her way to make my life miserable, spreading rumors, embarrassing me in front of everyone, making sure I was always in her shadow. Faith always had to be on top, always needed to feel like she was winning. It's pathetic, really. I nodded, taking in her words. I'd known about Faith's issues with Saren, but hearing it from Saren's perspective was a whole new level of insight. It was clear she'd been carrying this resentment for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. And now, it seemed, I'd handed her that opportunity on a silver platter. I won't lie, Saren continued, her voice softening, almost conspiratorial. I've always been a little attracted to you, Caleb. And getting back at Faith? It doesn't sound so bad, does it? Her words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. I didn't know how to respond. This was Saren, someone who'd been part of my life for years, suddenly offering herself to me as a weapon of revenge. The idea sent my mind spinning. But no matter how angry or betrayed I felt by Faith, I couldn't do it. Crossing that line would be something I'd never recover from. After a long, awkward pause, I finally spoke. I appreciate your honesty, Saren, I said carefully. But this isn't the answer. Saren studied me for a moment, her eyes searching mine, maybe looking for weakness or desperation. When she realized I wasn't going to budge, she let out a long sigh and leaned back. Suit yourself, she said, though this time her voice carried a faint edge of disappointment. It was then I realized Saren's offer wasn't about me. It wasn't about helping me or even revenge for my sake. This was about her own score to settle with Faith, her own bitterness to unload. I wasn't a person to her in that moment. I was a tool, a way to get back at her stepsister. And I wasn't going to let myself be dragged into their toxic feud. Still, that conversation stayed with me. The way Saren spoke about Faith, the way she so casually suggested I betray my wife, it all made me realize just how deeply dysfunctional the situation really was. This wasn't just a failing marriage. This was something darker. A web of resentment and bitterness that had been building for years, long before I was ever involved. As I left Saren's place that night, I felt a strange sense of finality, like something in me had shifted. Maybe it was the way she looked at me as I left, or maybe it was the cold realization that my marriage wasn't just damaged. It was shattered beyond repair. Whatever it was, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I'd always prided myself on being the bigger person, on holding on to my principles even when everything around me was falling apart. But now I was starting to question if those principles even mattered anymore. What was the point of staying true to my values when everyone else was playing by their own selfish rules? As I walked home that night, Saren's words echoed in my mind. Was revenge the answer? Would it have made me feel better to be with her? Or would it have just dragged me deeper into this toxic mess? One thing was clear, though. Faith had crossed a line, and there was no going back. I didn't take Saren up on her offer, but the thought of revenge lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. The seed had been planted, and whether I liked it or not, it was only a matter of time before it grew into something I couldn't ignore. When I got home, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The games, the betrayal, the manipulation, it all pointed to one conclusion. The time had come. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and I was finally ready to make that decision that I couldn't avoid it any longer. I had to confront Faith, to figure out if she even grasped the extent of the damage she'd caused, or if she was so far gone that she simply didn't care anymore. The house felt oppressive, the air thick with all the things we weren't saying. As I walked in, there she was, stretched out on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She didn't even glance my way. I paused, trying to collect my thoughts. My emotions were a storm inside me, but I had to stay calm. We need to talk, I said, my voice cracking slightly despite my best efforts to sound steady. Faith didn't even bother to look up. What now, Caleb? She asked, her tone dripping with indifference. I took a deep breath, determined to push through. Do you even realize what you've done? The damage you've caused? Do you even care? My voice wavered as the weight of the question hit me. Finally, she glanced up, her expression cold and detached. Hurt you? You're the one who's ruined everything, she shot back. You've made my life a living hell. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I stood there, stunned, struggling to process what she had just said. Wait, what? You honestly think this is all my fault? I asked, disbelief tightening my throat. She didn't hesitate for a second. Of course it's your fault. You trapped me here, Caleb. I'm stuck in this miserable life because of you. Don't act like you don't know that. I could feel my anger rising, but I forced myself to keep my composure. This life? We built this life together, Faith. I thought we were happy. What happened? She let out a bitter, empty laugh that sent a chill down my spine. What happened? I woke up, Caleb. I realized I've been wasting my time, stuck in this dead-end marriage for years. I deserve more than this. Her words were so cold, so detached, that I barely recognized the woman in front of me. This wasn't the Faith I had married. The woman I had loved and built a life with was gone, replaced by someone I didn't know, someone I didn't want to know. So what's the plan then? You think sending me those pictures with Kyle is going to fix anything? You think making me feel worse is going to change this? I asked, trying to understand how her mind worked. She shrugged nonchalantly, as if it didn't matter. I didn't force you to stay, did I? You're the one who chose to stick around. You're the one too scared to leave. Her complete lack of remorse was staggering. She wasn't just refusing to take responsibility. She had rewritten the entire narrative. In her version, I was the villain, the cause of all her misery. The manipulation, the lies, the endless games. It was like she'd convinced herself that it had all been my fault. I couldn't take it anymore. You really don't care, do you? I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the moment. You don't care about me, about us, about anything we've built together. Without hesitation, she delivered the final blow. I stopped caring a long time ago, Caleb. You're just the last one to figure it out. Her words felt like the last nail in the coffin. Any hope I'd been holding on to, that maybe we could fix this, maybe we could find a way back, was gone. She didn't care. She never had. I stared at her, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I don't even know who you are anymore, I whispered, the last shred of my belief in her slipping away. This isn't the woman I married. She laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed in the room. The woman you married? She sneered. She's long gone, Caleb. She disappeared a long time ago. But you were too blind to see it. Her words landed like a final, devastating blow. I had been clinging to a memory, a version of Faith that no longer existed. And now, standing there in the wreckage of our marriage, I realized there was nothing left to save. I tried to take a deep breath, but it felt impossible, like the air around me was too heavy to inhale. Every word she spoke was another blow, another confirmation that everything we'd built was crumbling into nothing. What happened to us? I asked, though it felt more like I was asking myself than her. I couldn't even remember the last time we were truly happy, the last time things felt real. My mind drifted back to our honeymoon. The excitement, the shared dreams of a future together. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, like they were from a completely different life. She didn't respond, and the silence between us said more than words ever could. But then, as if to twist the knife further, she brought up Saren. You know, Faith said, her tone unnervingly casual. I always knew you were more interested in her than me. Even at the start, you gave her more attention than you ever gave me. Don't think I didn't notice. For a moment, I was too stunned to reply. Wait, Saren? You think this is about Saren? Faith scoffed, her voice laced with contempt. Of course it's about Saren. You've always been more focused on her than on me. That's why I started seeing Kyle, because you were never really here, Caleb. You were always out there, chasing after her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You honestly think that's why things have been falling apart? Because of Saren? Faith, this has nothing to do with her. This is about us. You've been playing games for months, pushing me away, and now you're trying to pin it on someone else. Blame someone else? She snapped, letting out a bitter laugh. You've always blamed me. I'm not going to take the fall for your failures anymore. That was it, the moment it hit me like a ton of bricks. This marriage was over. There was no saving it, no path to reconciliation. The woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. Someone cold, indifferent, and unwilling to acknowledge the destruction she'd caused. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly, my voice shaking with finality. I'm done. She didn't even look up from her phone. Good. So am I, she replied, her tone flat, emotionless. That was it. No apology. No regret. just indifference. The weight of everything crushed me. I wasn't just losing a marriage. I was losing the future I thought we'd have together, the person I thought Faith was. And maybe I realized that person had never truly existed at all. I went upstairs and started packing a bag, my hands trembling as I folded clothes into a suitcase. The whole thing felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. This was the end. And as I walked out the door, I didn't look back. The frustration burned inside me long after I left. It wasn't just anger at her refusal to take responsibility. It was years of manipulation, jealousy, and constant blame weighing me down. There was nothing left. No marriage, no answers, just a swirling mess of emotions I couldn't escape. And then, against my better judgment, my thoughts drifted to Saren. I knew it was wrong to even consider it. I knew it was a terrible idea, something I'd regret. But in that moment I didn't care. I wanted revenge. I wanted Faith to feel the pain she'd inflicted on me. I wanted to show her that I wasn't the pushover she thought I was, that I did something I never thought I'd do. I went back to Saren. That night, I drove to her place, my heart pounding and my mind clouded with a storm of anger, confusion, and something darker I didn't want to name. When she opened the door, her surprise was obvious, but she didn't ask any questions. She didn't need to. The look on my face must have told her everything. "Caleb," she said, her voice cautious. "What's going on?" I didn't waste time with explanations. I stepped inside, and before I could second-guess myself, the words spilled out. "You were right. I want to do it. I want to take control of this. I want to show Faith that I'm not powerless." Her eyes widened for a moment, but it wasn't long before a slow, knowing smile crept across her face. She didn't need to ask what I meant. It was clear. This wasn't about her, not really. It was about Faith and this victory in their toxic, years-long battle. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice calm, though her eyes glinted with something almost predatory. She was ready. I nodded, shoving aside every doubt clawing at the edges of my mind. "Yeah, I'm sure." What happened next was a blur. Saren's eyes locked onto mine, her kiss aggressive and desperate. There was no tenderness, no passion. It wasn't love, and it wasn't even lust. It was something far darker. This wasn't about connection. It was about revenge, pure and simple. We were both playing the same game. She wanted to hurt Faith just as much as I did. And in that moment, I let her. It was a line being crossed. A statement I wasn't sure I wanted to make, but couldn't stop myself from making. I wanted to prove something to myself, to Faith. I wanted to reclaim some kind of power, to show that I wasn't someone she could walk all over. After it was over, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, a swirling mix of relief and disgust filling my chest. Relief because for the first time in what felt like forever, I had done something for myself, something that wasn't dictated by Faith's games. Disgust because I knew deep down this wasn't who I was. But there was no undoing it now. It was done. Saren, on the other hand, seemed perfectly content beside me. There was a satisfied smirk on her lips, and she trailed her fingers down my chest as if this was the start of something meaningful. I could feel the shift in her demeanor. To her, this wasn't just revenge. It was the beginning of something more. "You know," she said, her tone casual but her words anything but, "I could be a much better wife to you than Faith ever was." Her comment caught me off guard. I turned to her, my voice flat. "Why?" Her smile deepened, and her gaze never wavered. "I'm serious. Faith never appreciated you. She never really cared about you. Not the way I do. You deserve someone who sees you, Caleb. Someone who actually gets you." Her words made me uncomfortable. This wasn't what I had come for. I hadn't come here to start a relationship with Faith's stepsister, of all people. I'd come for revenge, for something to make me feel like I had the upper hand for once. But Saren clearly had other ideas. I didn't know what to say. The lines I thought I was drawing in my mind were already blurred beyond recognition. And now, Saren wasn't just a participant in this act of retaliation. She was shifting the game entirely, playing by her own rules. "We could be good together," Saren said softly, her tone shifting to something almost tender. We're both free now. We both want the same things. I shook my head and sat up, pulling away from her. Saren, no. This isn't what I want. She looked at me, startled and a little confused. What do you mean? I ran my hands over my face, trying to clear the fog in my head. I don't know what I thought this would be, but it's a mess. All of this isn't what I want. I'm not looking for a relationship. I don't even know what I'm doing. Her face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly, sitting up beside me. Caleb, I get it. I do. But you can't tell me you don't feel better now. You got back at faith. You took control of your life. Isn't that what you wanted? Her words hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. She wasn't entirely wrong. A part of me did feel like I'd taken some kind of control, like I'd finally done something to stand up to Faith and all her games. But another part of me felt hollow, like I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I don't know, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. I don't know. Saren reached out, her fingers lightly brushing my arm. Caleb, it's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. But you deserve happiness. You deserve more than Faith ever gave you. I nodded, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Her words barely registered as I grappled with the weight of what had just happened. I stood up, grabbing my clothes, the heaviness of my decision pressing down on me like a stone. I need to go, I muttered, not meeting her eyes. Her expression softened, though I could still see the faint trace of disappointment. If you need anything, you know where to find me. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I just walked out the door, my thoughts a chaotic mess. As I drove home, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't satisfaction. It was more like the sensation you get when you set down a heavy load you've been carrying for far too long. A sense of relief, mixed with something darker. Guilt. Regret. Had I done the right thing? Did this decision actually help? Or had I just made everything worse? When I pulled into the driveway, one thing was clear. There was no undoing what had been done. I had set something in motion, and I had no idea where it would lead. In the days that followed, I felt the weight of that night with Saren in every quiet moment. It wasn't the relief of triumph or the satisfaction of reclaiming control. It was the messy, complicated aftermath of a choice I couldn't take back. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel like I had won, but I did feel like, for once, I had pushed back against the tide of Faith's manipulation. It was small, it was wrong, but it felt like a tiny sliver of victory. And yet, deep down, I knew I hadn't fixed anything. I hadn't solved the real problem. There was no future with Saren, there never could be. This had never been about her. It had always been about Faith. Her lies, her games, her refusal to take responsibility for anything she'd done. And as the days passed, one thing became increasingly clear. I knew what I had to do and I had to end it. I couldn't keep living in this toxic mess, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. No more lies, no more secrets. It was time to tell Faith the truth about everything. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen. Faith was sitting there, sipping her coffee, looking calm and unbothered, like nothing had changed. But the tension between us was palpable, thicker than ever. Today it felt different. Today it felt like the end. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady, though my heart pounded like a drum. She glanced up, her eyes narrowing. What now? I took a deep breath, bracing myself for the fallout. I was with Saren. For a moment the world stood still. Faith froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips, disbelief flashing in her eyes. I could almost hear her mind scrambling to process what I had just said. Slowly, her expression shifted, from shock to fury. You what? She spat, her voice trembling with rage. I was with Saren? I repeated, forcing my voice to remain calm, even as a storm raged inside me. After everything you've done, after all the games, I reached my breaking point, and I did it. Faith shot up from her chair, knocking it over with a loud crash. Her face was red, her hands trembling at her sides. You disgusting, pathetic piece of shit, she screamed. You were with her? My stepsister? The one person I've always despised. Her entire body seemed to shake with fury, her fists balling up at her sides. Her rage filled the room, consuming everything in its path. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel like the villain in her narrative. I just felt empty, done. You did this to get back at me, didn't you? She yelled, her voice cracking. You were with her to hurt me. How could you do something so vile? I didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, Faith, it was revenge. I'm not proud of it, but after everything you've done to me, after all the lies and games, I hit my limit. I broke. Her eyes burned with malice. You're a monster, she hissed. How could you do this to me? After everything, my entire life with you, I should have known you'd betray me like this. That was the tipping point for me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. My obsession with Saren? I snapped. Are you kidding me? You turned our life into a circus. Faith. You're the one who played games, who tried to make me jealous. You're the one who pushed me away. You're the one who started seeing Kyle. I tried. God, I tried to fix things. But you didn't care. You just wanted to be right. And you destroyed everything. For a brief moment, Faith just stared at me, her expression frozen in shock. The weight of my words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. But just as quickly as it landed, she switched tactics, her anger twisting into defensiveness. I only saw Kyle because of how you treated me. She shot back, her voice shrill and unsteady. You made me feel invisible, Caleb. Like I was nothing to you. Like Saren was always first. Her words were laced with bitterness, and I could see her desperation to rewrite the story, to frame herself as the victim. But I wasn't buying it anymore. This wasn't about Saren. It wasn't about Kyle. It was about her refusal to take responsibility for the damage she'd caused, for the wreckage she'd left in her wake. And I wasn't going to let her shift the blame anymore. You never cared about me, Faith hissed. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. That's such a load of crap, Faith. You've been manipulating me for years, using every trick in the book to make me feel guilty, to control me. You've been playing me from the very beginning, and now you're trying to act like the victim. Her face twisted with rage, and for a moment, I thought she might actually hit me. But instead, she stepped back, her voice trembling as she spat. I'm filing for divorce. You're a monster. I can't stay married to someone like you. I barely flinched. Fine, do it. But don't you dare try to pin this all on me. You're just as much to blame for everything that's happened. You've destroyed everything. Faith. Her glare could have burned a hole through me. She stood there, breathing hard, her eyes filled with hurt. But underneath the anger and the bitterness, I saw something else. Understanding. She knew this moment had been a long time coming. She had pushed me, manipulated me, tested me, and prodded me until there was nothing left to give. She had made this inevitable. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I felt an odd sense of relief, a freedom I hadn't felt in years. The weight of the toxicity, the lies, and the manipulation was finally lifting. A week later, Faith officially filed for divorce. True to form, she launched straight into damage control, painting herself as the wronged party, the victim in the mess we'd made. But I didn't care anymore. Let her tell whatever story she needed to tell. I knew the truth, and deep down, so did she. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost Saren, too. In the end, her actions had isolated her completely. She had no one to blame but herself. As for me, I began picking up the pieces of my life. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I second-guessed my choices, wondering if I had gone too far with Saren, if I could have handled things differently. But in the end, I knew I had done what I needed to do. It wasn't about the act itself. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back control in a situation where I had felt powerless for far too long. I'm not proud of every decision I made, but I'm not ashamed either. I did what I had to do to escape a marriage that had drained me to my core. Now, my focus is on the future. For the first time in years, I'm free from the lies, the jealousy, the manipulation, and the constant battles. It's going to take time, and I know the road ahead won't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction. The next time I let someone into my life, it will be different. It will be with someone who respects me, who values trust and honesty over mind games and power plays. The past is behind me now, and I'm finally ready to move forward. Ready to heal. Ready to find happiness again.